الحمد لله رب العالمين صلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. طيب. So inshallah ta'ala, tonight we will resume our commentary on the book Muslim Morals and Manners. And we have most recently been commenting on the subsection which provides guidance or provides guidelines for the interaction with others. And we started out, as we said, that the compilers, they mentioned the individuals who we have to interact with and who have rights over us and entitlements. They began to mention those groups and those individuals in descending order. So the first group they mentioned was parents. Because after the right of Allah over a human being, no one has more right than that person's parents. And then they went to the nearest relatives, blood relations. And then after that, they descended to the spouse, husband and wife. Because after your parents and your closest relatives, no one has more right over you than your spouse. Then they come and they mention the subsection entitled being kind to neighbors. Being kind to neighbors. So what we see is that after speaking extensively about the relationship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects us to foster with our spouses, the compilers turn to another group or type of people with whom we as members of society interact. And they do this in order to clarify the Islamic guidelines for that interaction. And this is another entry, as we see in that long list of individuals and groups which the lawgiver, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has indicated should be treated in a certain way. Now, it should be clear by now, after mentioning at least three of this long list of groups, it should be clear to all of us by now that this issue of interpersonal relationships and how we handle them is very important in Islam. Interpersonal relationships, how you deal with other people, is very important in Islam. You see this because there's a whole subsection dedicated to it, and all the time we spent on just three groups tells you it's really important in Islam. But unfortunately, in spite of all of the information that we've learned, everything we've discussed, everything that shows you and indicates to you how important this is, it's quite common for Muslims to downplay the importance, or downplay their importance. So few are those who consider how they treat their parents, how they treat their close relatives, their spouse, their neighbor, and their fellow Muslims. Few are those who consider this treatment a form of worship, a type of ibadah. That when I interact with this person, I'm actually engaged in worship. So I need to be mindful how I treat the other person, how I interact with them, whether it be a spouse, whether it be a relative, whether it be another Muslim. I need to be careful because this is what? Worship. And it's something that I'm going to be questioned about. I'm going to be asked about how I treated fulan wa allan. And it's something for which I will either be rewarded or punished. Most people, when they interact with someone else, these things are not on their mind. Interpersonal relationships, how we treat each other, is quite often, unfortunately, in the Muslim community, dismissed as inconsequential, trivial, and no big deal. This is why there are very few, unfortunately, if you look at it, if you look at the body of work and material that's out there, there are very few khutbahs, very few lectures, Very few written works dedicated to the subject when you compare with other subjects. So for example, a person lives in a community for years and he struggles with his children. They disrespect him. They walk all over. And he goes to the mosque, takes him to the mosque every Friday, hoping that the imam will talk about birr al-walidain. And he can go 10 years, 15 years, 20 years in one community and never hear one khutbah about birr al-walidain. How children should respect their parents. You could have a couple, a wife who's being mistreated by her husband, abused by her husband. And abuse doesn't necessarily mean physical abuse. Could be emotional abuse, could be verbal abuse. And she's going to Jumu'ah every Friday hoping the imam will talk about how a man is supposed to treat his wife. And she could go for 5 years, for 10 years running and never hear one khutbah about the relationship between husband and wife. A person could struggle with his neighbor, have a neighbor who just what? Tramples on his rights, transgresses, is inconsiderate, and go a decade and never hear one khutbah about how a neighbor should treat their neighbor and the rights of neighbors, etc. So this is the unfortunate reality that these topics are not given what? They're not given much consideration. And that's why when people come and they say that they've been mistreated, disrespected, verbally or even physically abused in the Muslim community, the onus is placed on the victim. The victim is held responsible for what took place. So they're told, you need to, really, you're going to have to grow thicker skin. That's nothing. You're going to see much worse than that. Or they'll say you need to be patient. You just need to, be patient. It's just one of the hardships of what? Of being in a Muslim community, that you get mistreated, you get abused, you get kicked around by other Muslims. Even though the Prophet said, when he was asked who's the Muslim, he said, "Man salima al-muslimuna min lisanihi wa yadihi." He is the one from whose tongue and hands other Muslims are safe. But we tell people who come to the Muslim community, hey, you need to be patient, you need to deal with it. Roll with the punches, so to speak. Or we tell them, that's just how they are. So they're just supposed to accept it. They're supposed to accept people behave in a certain way that's contradictory to Islam, and they're told, that's just how they are. Just accept it. This approach is wrong. And it's contradictory to the prophetic guidance. Because the Prophet ﷺ, he told us, مَنْ رَأَ مِنْكُمْ مُنْكَرًا فَلْيُغَيِّرْهُ بِيَدِهِ فَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِلِسَانِهِ فَإِنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِقَلْبِهِ وَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ. He said, whoever amongst you sees an evil act being committed, then let him change it with his hands. Anything that Islam disapproves of that you see being done, change it with your hands. If you can't do that, you don't have the authority, you don't have the ability, then change it with your tongue by speaking out against it, by condemning it, by saying that's wrong and you shouldn't be, criticizing the one who does it. And if he's unable to do this, then he should change it with his heart, by hating it and disassociating himself from it and the people who take part in it. So if you look in this hadith, you see the Prophet ﷺ used the word munkar. Man ra'a minkum munkaran. And he used it in its mutlaq form. Absolute. General. Meaning any and every evil act. Doesn't matter what it is. Whether it's related to aqeedah, beliefs, ibadah, worship, mu'amalat, interpersonal relations. Whenever you see something evil, something wrong, something Islam disapproves, you're supposed to say something. Nobody should say, oh, come on, man, it's a little thing. No. Is it evil or not? Does Islam disapprove of it or not? If so, you're supposed to speak about it. You're supposed to disapprove of it. Mistreating others, la shak, there's no doubt about it, it is an evil act. And it should be warned against. And the people who do it should be censured. They should be criticized. We should speak out against that. Just like we speak out against the people who abandon prayer, they deal in interest, they adore this dunya, and they engage in innovative practices. We speak out against that as if that's the only evil in the dunya. And when people mistreat other people, we turn a blind eye and a deaf ear. Nah. Wrong is wrong, And dismissing it encourages the behavior and enables those who mistreat others to continue in their abusive behavior with impunity, unabated. No, we can't enable the wrong thing. We need to be stopping the wrong thing. As the Prophet said, فَلْيُغَيِّرُ بِيَدِهِ فَإِن لَمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِلِسَانِهِ. He stops it with his hand, and if he can't, with his tongue. So what that teaches you, ya ikhwani wa khawati, sorry to make this introduction so long, but we in the community, in the Muslim community, we have to do better. And where does it start? It starts with acknowledging that our faith is only as good as the character we demonstrate. You're only as good a Muslim as what? As your behavior indicates. And the true believer is known by his or her, or by the way how he or she treats their fellow Muslim, their fellow man. As the Prophet said in the hadith, he said, أَكْمَلْ مُؤْمِنِينَ إِيمَانًا أَحْسَنُهُمْ خُلُقًا. He said, the believer whose faith is closest to being complete is the one who has the best character. Not the one who wears the shortest thobe, not the one who grows the longest beard, not the one who has the best hijab. He said the one who has the best character, who treats people the best. So we have to stop doing is confining Islam to a handful of rituals and outward demonstrations of piety, and thinking that because we do this handful of things, we are perfect Muslims, destined for paradise, without being questioned or punished. Remember, the heaviest thing on the scales on the Day of Judgment will be what? Hijab? Salat? Beard? La. It'll be good character. The Prophet said, أَثْقَلُ شَيْءٍ فِي الْمِيزَانِ حُسْنُ الْخُلُقِ. The heaviest thing in the scales is going to be good character. How we treat each other, how we deal with each other. And don't forget that Allah punished a woman for mistreating, for abusing a cat. So how much more is a person likely to be punished for mistreating a human being or human beings, whether those human beings be their parents, relatives, a spouse, a neighbor, or a fellow Muslim? So I wanted to start with that introduction just to emphasize the importance of this topic because it's been a while. And now with that said, we'll talk about the rights of neighbors. And the points that we're going to talk about or we're going to discuss, first and foremost, we're going to define the neighbor. Who is the neighbor in Islam? Then we're going to talk about types of neighbors and their levels or their status as it relates to their type. Then we're going to talk about or mention some of the nusul, some of the texts that indicate the status of neighbors in general, the place of neighbors in Islam. We're going to talk about what those texts tell us about neighbors. And then finally, we're going to talk about some of the rights or list some of the rights of neighbors. طيب. So who is a neighbor in Islam? Who is a neighbor in Al-Islam? Al-Jar, a neighbor in Islam, is the person who lives right next door to you or in close proximity to your residence. So either they live like wall to wall right next door, or they live what? They live close to you. They live close to you. So now close, that's kind of ambiguous, isn't it? Right? Close could be within 3 blocks. Close could be within 3 houses, isn't it? And the scholars, they differ. What's the meaning of close? How do we understand close in Islam? What's the extent of a neighborhood? And the rights that go hand in hand with the neighborhood. So some of the scholars, they said, because there's some narrations where the Prophet said, or the Prophet was reported to have said, or some of his companions were reported to have said, 40 houses in every direction. They said, that's a neighbor. 40 houses in every direction. Man, that's a lot of neighbors, isn't it? And so some of the other scholars, they looked at that and they said, well, these narrations, their authenticity is in question. And if we follow that guideline, it will create mashaqqa. It will create hardship. Right? If you have to give these rights to people who are 40 houses in front, 40 houses to your right, 40 houses to your left and 40 houses to your rear. That's a lot of people you have to give their rights to. There's a likelihood that you'll violate those rights inadvertently and be what? In trouble. So they say what's better that it be said that the neighbor is dictated by custom and common practice, al-urf, right? So that's what determines who a neighbor is. The common practice and custom, what people generally accept and consider to be a neighbor, that's the neighbor. And that's going to differ from what? From culture to culture, time to time, and place to place. Okay? But generally, the people who what? Live close to you, they're your neighbors. Types of neighbors and their levels. Neighbors are 3 types, and their entitlements are 3 degrees. The first level is a Muslim neighbor who is a relative. So he's a Muslim, he lives close to you, and relative. That person has what? Has the highest level of this neighborliness, or entitlement to neighborliness. Why? Because they're entitled to the right of Islam, the right of being a neighbor, proximity, and the right of what? Qaraba, the right of kinship. So because they have all these 3 rights, they what? They have the highest level, they have the highest degree. Then from ba'dalik, you have a Muslim neighbor who is unrelated to you, not related to you. And this person is the next degree, next level. And so they have the right of proximity and the right of Islam. The thumb ba'dalik, number 3, is a non-Muslim neighbor who just has what? One right, the right of proximity. Okay, but they do have rights. So don't think that when we talk about neighbors, we're just talking about Muslim neighbors. No. Even your non-Muslim neighbors have rights. And this is how the companions understood the guidance of the Prophet ﷺ in this regard. So we have the famous hadith collected by Bukhari, in which he mentioned that Ibn Umar, he once slaughtered a sheep. And then he took it to his family for them to skin it, to clean it, and then to distribute it. Okay? So he left, and he came back to see if the work had been done. And when they said it had, he said, "Did you give or did you gift some of the sheep to my Jewish neighbor? Because I heard the Prophet say, ما زال جبريل يوصيني بالجار حتى ظننت أنه سيورثه." He said, Jibreel did not cease to counsel me regarding the neighbor and remind me of his rights until I thought he was going to make him from the people, from the heirs, from the people who inherit. So Ibn Umar understood this hadith to encompass his Jewish neighbor. So you should give him some of the what? Some of the sheep, because the Prophet said about the neighbor. So he considered to encompass it. So what that teaches you is that even a non-Muslim has the right of what? Proximity, the right of what? Of being a neighbor. And what comes with that from entitlements. طيب, ثم بعد ذلك, what does Islam say about neighbors? About the status of neighbors? طيب, first of all, we can turn to the Quran. Surah An-Nisa, the 4th surah, verse 36, which is known as Ayat al-Huquq al-Ashara, the verse of 10 rights, or the 10 people who have rights. And in that verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا وَبِذِي الْقُرْبَى وَالْيَتَامَى وَالْمَسَاكِينَ وَالْجَارِ ذِي الْقُرْبَى وَالْجَارِ الْجُنُبِ إِلَى آخِرِ الْآيَةِ. So he says, worship Allah and associate nothing with Him as a rival or partner or peer. And to parents, do good. Be good and obedient to your parents. And to your relatives and orphans and the needy. And then he mentions the neighbor related. Meaning someone who's what? Related to you, but they're also a neighbor. And the neighbor unrelated, to the end of the ayah. So he mentioned these 2 groups specifically as having what? The rights of what? Of ihsan, that you be good to them, that you treat them well. We also have the hadith that we just mentioned, in which the Prophet said, I thought Jibreel was going to make the neighbor an heir. that is going to make him someone who inherits. Let you know that the right of the neighbor is close to the right of what? A relative who inherits. You also have the hadith of Abu Dharr, collected by Muslim, in which he said, Inna Khalili awsani. He says, my friend, the Messenger of Allah, advised me. إذا طبخت مرقا فأكثر معه ثم أنظر أهل بيت من جيرانك فأصبهم منه بمعروف. He says in the hadith that my friend, the Messenger of Allah, advised me, whenever you prepare some soup, increase the water. Why would you increase the water? That'll make it watery, right? Why would you increase the water? Okay, what happens when you put more water? You get more soup, right? You get more soup. So he said, فَأَكْثِرْ مَاءً. He said, increase the water so you have more soup. Then choose one of the families in your neighborhood and give them a reasonable portion of it. Give them some of the what? Some of the soup. We also have the hadith of Bukhari and Muslim on the authority of Abu Hurairah, in which the Prophet ﷺ said, I swear by Allah, such a person does not believe. Wallahi la yu'min, wallahi la yu'min, wallahi la yu'min. He said it 3 times. I swear by Allah, such a person does not believe. They don't believe. They're not a believer. So when the Prophet said this, the companions became concerned. What is it that can disqualify a person from being a believer? They wanted to know so they could avoid that behavior. And this is critical, that the companions were keen to know what was good so they could do it, what was bad so they could avoid it. They were not like us in many cases. Somebody says the person doesn't believe. And we're like, I don't want to know what that is because maybe I do that and I want to keep doing it. Yeah, they wanted to know what it was so they could avoid it. So at any rate, they asked the Prophet ﷺ, they said, about whom are you speaking? Man ya Rasulullah. Who are you talking about? Who is this person who doesn't believe? He replied, he said, Man la ya'man jaruhu bawa'iqah. He says, the one whose neighbor does not feel safe from his bawa'iq. What is bawa'iq? Evil, mischief, harm, abuse, oppression, etc. The one whose neighbor he fears that you will do these things to him, then that person is not a believer, according to the Prophet ﷺ. We also have the hadith that's about al-Bukhari Muslim on the authority of Abu Hurairah as well, in which the Prophet said, Ya nisa al-Muslimat, la tahqiranna jaratun li jaratiha, walau firsani shat. He said, O Muslim women, no one of you should consider a gift too insignificant to give to her neighbor, even if it is the hooves of a sheep. You know, I guess you can, I don't know, you probably know this, Amen. You could probably speak to this. Can you take hooves and put them in soup and create like a, does it give taste to it, flavor to it, or something like that? If you don't know, I imagine that's what they probably do with it. But most people would say the hooves is just something you want. You throw it away, right? Oh, I'm not going to give this to my neighbor. No, the neighbor could find some value in it. The neighbor could find some value in it, whether it be put it in soup to give the flavor to the soup. Whatever they do with it, they can find value in it. Even that little thing. So what happens sometimes is that we'll say, oh, I can't give this to my neighbor. You know, because it's not significant. It's not, no. We're not trying to impress our neighbor. We're trying to what? Honor our neighbor. Be generous to our neighbor. And whatever we have, we what? We share it. طيب, ثم بعد ذلك, we also have the hadith that's about Bukhari Muslim and Abu Hurairah, in which the Prophet said, no one should prevent his neighbor from placing a peg in his wall. Now what the Prophet is talking about is that back in the day, you would have 2 houses be joined by a single wall. And those houses will be made from mud or clay. And so the wall was susceptible due to rain and other elements to erode and collapse. Right? So what your neighbor might want to do, now obviously you're sharing this wall. So your neighbor might want to put a piece of wood on top of the wall, and then based on top of that, build a roof. Create a roof that would protect the wall. But if he puts wood on top of the wall, that wood is not just on his side of the wall, it's on what? Your side as well. So one neighbor might feel annoyed or vexed by the placing of this wood. So the Prophet said, don't prevent him from placing it, but what? Bear it. Tolerate it. Okay? Tolerate it. Don't prevent him from what? Putting that wood. And we could make analogies in our modern world to, for example, your neighbor wants to put a fence. For example. He wants to put a fence and he's going to put it on the, what they call it, easement. Is that what they call it, Abd'Llah? So basically you have that middle ground between your property and his property. And so he wants to put a fence. Some people will object to him putting a fence. That would be an example of that. That you let him put the fence. Okay? If that's what he wants to do for his property. We also have the hadith. We'll mention this one finally. Collected by al-Bukhari Muslim. Again, on the authority of Abu Hurairah. In which the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Man yu'minu billahi wal yawmil akhir, fala yu'dhi jarah." He said, whoever believes in Allah on the last day, then let him avoid harming, annoying, agitating his neighbor. Another verse of the same hadith, he said, فَلْيُحْسِنْ إِلَى جَارِهِ. Let him be kind to his neighbor. So what do we learn from these texts? First of all, we learn that neighbors have rights over us. And that being good to them is wajib. It's obligatory because Allah amara bi. Allah what? Ordered it. And the Prophet ordered it. We also learn that their rights are very close in priority to those of relatives who inherit. The rights of neighbors are very close to those of what? Relatives who inherit. We also learn that being a good neighbor entails thinking of your neighbor and sharing what you have with them. That you actually think about what? Your neighbor. And share what you have with them. That they're on your mind. Oh, I have this neighbor and we made this big cake. We made this big cake that we can't eat all of it. Why don't we cut it in half and send some to them? We made this big pot of soup. Let's send some. You actually what? You think of them. Okay, you don't have to be told, but you automatically what? You're thinking about them and how you can share with them and be good to them. Another thing we learn from these texts is harming one's neighbor is a sign of a deficiency in one's faith. It's a sign that you have what? Your faith is lacking. It's a sign. You're not good to your neighbor. It's a sign that you lack faith. Another thing we learn is harming one's neighbor is therefore prohibited and sinful behavior. It's sinful to harm your neighbor. Finally, if causing your neighbor to fear being harmed by you is haram. Just him thinking that you might harm him is haram, then actually harming him or her is an even greater one. An even greater sin. So what are some examples of harmful actions? What are some things that a person might do that would harm their neighbor? One action would be to spy on them. To spy on your neighbor. This would be what? This would be, you're harming them by spying on them. Okay? You have to respect their privacy. طيب, another way you can harm your neighbor is by backbiting and slandering them. Okay? You'll be harming your neighbor by backbiting and slandering them. Another way you can harm your neighbor is if you borrow things from them without returning them. Right? Hey, I got some people coming over and I was going to make some soup. Can I borrow that big pot you have? Oh, sure. And then a month goes by, 6 months goes by, a year goes by, and they never return the pot. Okay? And then maybe you ask them about it. And they're like, what pot? What pot? You know, they don't even remember that they borrowed the pot. So one way you could hurt a neighbor is if you borrow something without what? Returning it. But another way you could hurt your neighbor is if you visit too what? No, that was yours. Astaghfirullah. But if you visit too frequently, if you visit too what? Frequently, you should visit your neighbor, right? Check on. How you doing? How's everything going? Do you need anything? That's good. But you shouldn't visit what? Too frequently, right? You're just always over there, right? Okay? Or if you visit at inappropriate times. You visit at inappropriate times, right? You come at midnight. Man, I didn't know you went to bed this early. Early? It's midnight. What are you talking about? It's midnight. Right? You visit when people are usually asleep. Or another way you can harm your neighbors by doing things which are inconsiderate. Doing things which are inconsiderate. Like what?
Having guests over at inappropriate times.
Mumtaz, that's a good example. So for example, you have loud guests over at inappropriate times. Midnight, guests are loud and boisterous, right? And people can't sleep. And people do this in neighborhoods all the time. They'll have a guest over, they'll play music loud, and you can't sleep. And if you go over there and you were to say kindly, hey, you think you guys could like tune it down because it is like 1 o'clock in the morning? Sometimes, the neighbors will do what? They'll turn it up. They'll turn it up even louder, and they'll, All right, another example is, and this actually happened to me. I'll give you this example. Once I came home from school. This is when I was studying the kingdom. And we shared like a villa, like a duplex, top and bottom, with another family. And they had some young children. And so when I came home from school, two of the children were like sitting outside my gate, like waiting. And so I asked them, I said, where's your family? Where's everybody at? Well, my mom went to a gathering, and she said for us to stay here and for you guys to watch us until they came back. I'm serious as a heart attack. I'm serious. That actually happened to me. And okay, that's inconsiderate. What if I had something that I had to... I can't leave these children out here by themselves. So what if I had something I had to do? That didn't matter to them. What they had to do was more important. And so I had to watch them.
That's
okay? Yeah, I had to watch them, but it actually happened to me. And that was inconsiderate. I thought that was really inconsiderate. But another example is, for example, let's say that you cut your grass, okay? You mow your lawn, and you don't have like one of those bags on your lawn. So you get grass all over your neighbor's driveway, all over their sidewalk, and maybe they have their car parked in the driveway that just came from the detail shop, and it's got grass all stuck to it, right? And then you just go in the house, like, oh, alhamdulillah, that's done. I can sit back and watch football now, right? That's what? That's inconsiderate, man. You just ruined their car, messed up their driveway. Who's going to come and clean that up now? If you don't clean it up, they're going to be forced to what? To have to clean up. That's inconsiderate. So these are some things we can do that are harmful to our neighbors. But now let's conclude, inshallah ta'ala, with some of the rights of the neighbors. And we'll mention those ala ujala sariyah. First of all, one of the rights of the neighbors is that you are generous and kind with them in accordance with your means. And that could include generous with them in terms of what? Your wealth and property. Generous with your status. Generous with anything which is beneficial to them. Okay? So for example, let's say that you had a neighbor who they were in a situation or in a jam, and there was someone who you could intercede with them to make their affairs easy. That you would use what? Your status and your influence to what? To make things easy. So in this way, it's not money, it's what? It's more what? Intangible, but you use that to help what? To help your neighbor. Okay? All right. Another right is giving gifts. Okay? Giving gifts in accordance with what? Your means. And we talked about how you can give food, you can give, whatever. But you give gifts in accordance with what? Your means. Another very important right of the neighbor is that you avoid harming them. You avoid agitating, doing anything to annoy them. Another right of the neighbor is that you bear and tolerate the harm of your neighbor. And we gave the example how the Prophet said, don't stop your neighbor from what? From putting a peg in the wall that you what? That you share, okay? That you tolerate some things that to you are what? Annoying or vexing or agitating. And last but not least, that when your neighbor is when you don't see your neighbor for a while, you ask about it. You ask about it. And if they have a need that you're able to fulfill, you fulfill the need. So let's say one of our neighbors came and he said, I'm going to go out of town for the weekend. Could you feed my cat? Right? Could you feed my cat? I'll give you the key. You come, change the water, put some food. Could you do that for me? That's something well within what? Our ability. Once a day you do that. Could you water the plants? I'm going to be gone for a week. Whatever it is, something that we can do for our neighbor, we're willing to what? To do it. And if we don't see our neighbor for a while, we'll do what? We'll ask about them. Is everything all right? Usually you're out, washing the car, watering the grass, whatever. I didn't see you for a few weeks. Is everything okay? We would actually ask about our neighbors. So these are some of the rights of neighbors. And with that, we will conclude. Any questions? Any comments? Any complaints? Fadli.
I have a comment.
Comment. Okay.
Right now where I'm living, I've been living there for 3 years, which is the longest I've ever lived in one location.
Okay.
I had the most amazing neighbor.
Mumtaz.
I feel like his mannerism is just like a Muslim. Like, I didn't know how to be good to a neighbor like that until I moved there.
Subhanallah.
He's an old man.
Uh-huh.
He's always, like, anything he can do. Like, oh, I got some vegetables from my garden. Here's for you and your family. He's always bringing us food,
MashaAllah.
candy for the kids. He's always, like, helpful. Gives us even, like, little plants. I just started this little plant. Now, if you water it like this every day, and it's going to grow, like, he's always giving tips.
Subhanallah.
Things to do with the yard, things not to do.
Eh.
If you need help with anything, all the time.
Jameen.
He's, subhanAllah, the best neighbor ever.
Jameen.
And I feel like sad for him because I think, like, as a Muslim, like, I know I'm his neighbor. I try to be more helpful to him, even though there's really nothing I can do for him. He's got everything taken care of. But I constantly make dua for him. He's not Muslim, but I try to talk to him whenever I can.
MashaAllah.
Always over the fence. But it's important too when you have a neighbor that might not be Muslim, especially if they have very good manners, very kind. The least you can do is make dua for them. If you don't have enough time, or maybe you don't feel like what you have is significant enough, or you can't help them because they have everything taken care of, you should make dua for your neighbor. Because maybe Allah, especially if they're non-Muslim, Allah can help them, maybe change their heart or facilitate through you for them to become Muslim.
Jameen.
He's a real good neighbor.
That's Jameel. And we don't want to be outdone. We don't want to be out-Muslimed by our non-Muslim neighbors. You know what I mean? You don't want that. You don't want your non-Muslim neighbor to behave more like a Muslim than you do. And also, we always complain about how Muslims get a bad rap in the media. And how the perceptions of Muslims are so bad in the world. And we have to understand that we do play a role in changing that perception. And we do it through what? Through being good neighbors, being good colleagues and classmates in university and at work, etc., and demonstrating a form of Islam that is counter to what they're seeing in the media. And makes them what? Think. Oh man, that can't be right, because I know he's not like that. I know Habib, he's not like that. You follow? You guys see what I'm saying? That is so critical for us to do. Our job is tremendous, but we do have a role. Instead of complaining about it, we need to demonstrate. We need to demonstrate the beauty of Islam in our actions. And that includes the way we deal with what? Our non-Muslim neighbors. Anything else? Any other comments, complaints, critiques?
Just the food and the gift, it doesn't have to be like for rich and for poor neighbor. Even if he's rich, it's like that doesn't change the fact. It's like you not give it for person need. You give it to somebody has right over you.
Ahsan. Yeah. That it don't think that the person I give to, they have to be needy. No, you're not giving to them from the point that they need it. You're giving to them from the point of being generous and kind, just being neighborly. Just being neighborly. And it's something we have to work on. And I think sometimes we're afraid of the reaction. We're afraid of the reaction. You bake a bunch of cookies and take it to your neighbor, and because that's just so uncommon, they're going to be maybe a little bit put off, uncomfortable, suspicious, if you will, right? And we're so worried about that reaction, but we need to be worried more about Allah and His pleasure and the effect that it might have ultimately on that neighbor. So, if anything else, go on. Adly.
I'm a little bit confused because when you started out, you were saying something like, when we see something or something being done at the masjid or somebody behaving a certain way, we shouldn't tell someone else, be patient with them or let it go or keep our mouth closed or I don't know, I'm confused. But then I know like right here at this masjid, we've had a couple of people that have come to the masjid and have acted a certain way over and over and over, but then when you say something, it's like, be patient, they have issues, let them be, avoid them, stay away from them. I don't know, like, you say something, do the people in authority handle it? Does it just go by and this person continues to act a certain way? Or like, how do you do that? I don't know.
Okay, well, let me ask you this question. Let's make it personal. Let's say that you came to the mosque. A mosque that you're not, I guess you're not, it's new to you, a new community, okay? Let's say you're a new Muslim, and you don't know, and you're kind of expecting to be embraced by the Muslims. And then some people, they abused you. They called you names, they criticized your hijab, whatever it was, okay? And that hurt you. And then you went and you told maybe some other sisters, or you went and told someone in authority, someone you thought who could what? Do something about it. And they told you, well, that's just how that person is. I mean, how would you feel? I mean, you feel like, okay, especially if you're reading these types of things about how Muslims are supposed to deal with other Muslims. So when you read something and what you see is 180 degrees out of phase from what you read, especially when you're a new Muslim who left their religion because you saw all this hypocrisy and all these contradictions, and you come into Islam and you see what you think is the same thing, a lot of people, that causes them to turn back on their heels. My question is this. The people who enable this type of behavior and just say, oh, that's just how they are. And they'll never take that person to task and say, hey, man, what's wrong with you? You can't do somebody like this. You're a Muslim, man. What's wrong with you? They won't even say anything. Take that person to task. And then that person who was abused decides, you know what? I don't need this, man. I can just go back and be a Christian. Don't those people bear some of the responsibility for that person leaving Islam? When they didn't do anything to protect that person? And like I said, if you look at what the Prophet said, he said two things. One, he said the true Muslim is the one from whose tongue and hands other Muslims are saved. So it shouldn't be okay in a Muslim community for people to be abused on a regular basis. We shouldn't be okay with that. Second thing, the Prophet, so we know it's wrong. Then the Prophet said, when you see wrong, any wrong, then you have to change it in one of these three ways based upon your ability. So now my question is this. I have a problem with double standards. This wrong, oh, we have to stand up. We have to change it. We have to talk about it. And somebody does this, we have to let them know. We'll kick them out of the masjid if they do this. But this wrong thing, we'll sweep it under the rug. Can't do that. Wrong is wrong, and the Prophet didn't differentiate, didn't distinguish. He said, "Mara minkum munkaran." Any wrong thing, he should do what? A, B, or C. So this is the thing I think that, and I'm going to tell you honestly, I've been all over this country, been overseas, and generally speaking, when men get together, Muslim men get together, they know each other, they don't know each other, there's fellowship. You feel embraced. You feel brought in. That same man goes out after the Maghrib, Isha prayer, dinner, whatever it was, and joins his family. And they begin to do what? To report on their experience. And 9 times out of 10, the woman got the cold shoulder. Entered the room and found women who wouldn't what? Return her salams. No one would talk to her. And sometimes they talk about her in her presence. For example, women who know Arabic but they don't look Arabic. They'll go to a gathering where there's a lot of Arab women. And those women will be what? Talking about them, unbeknownst to them that those women understand everything that they say. This is not something that is a one-off. It happens every now and again. This is what? A trend, an epidemic, a problem in the Muslim community. And it's something that has to be addressed. It can't just be ignored. We can't be ostriches who stick our heads in the sand and things are going to go. It's not going to go away. Until what? Until we make it a big deal, like we make prayer a big deal, and bid'ah a big deal, and shirk a big deal. We have to make this a big deal, especially amongst the sisters. You guys are awful when it comes to this. Interpersonal relations, awful. And I'm saying it to you for your benefit. I'm not trying to insult you or put you down. I'm saying it's something you have to work on. You have these, everywhere you go, cliques. Everywhere you go, this group talks about that group. It's a problem. That's not even a new thing. It's something even back in the time of what? The Prophet is something. To the point when you look at, if you look at the verse in Surah Al-Hujurat, Allah says what? Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, la yaskhar qawmin min qawm, asa an yakunu khayran minhum, wala nisa min nisa. Truth. Allah says, oh you who believe. That includes what? Men and women. No need to do what? To mention women specifically because they're included by the khitab, by the address, oh you who believe. Don't let some of you mock and ridicule others. It's possible that those who those who are being mocked are better than those who mock. And let not women mock other women. Like, why did Allah specify women? Because they do it more. So they need to be what? Singled out. So it's a problem you guys have and you have to work on. And you can't just sweep it under the rug. And you have to realize that when you do that, you're enabling evil. And the Muslims are supposed to what? Stop evil, not enable it. Any other questions, comments, or complaints?
One of the most beautiful hadith in
Subhanallah. That he mentioned the hadith, he said, indeed a Muslim can reach through his good character the level of the one who spends the night praying and the day fasting. This good character, but we don't get it. And it's not just with other Muslims, it's with our neighbors, with our spouses. We don't want to treat each other. It's a problem. And we don't think it's important enough to what? To focus on it and to change. هذا وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. بارك الله فيك.